Open Market is sponsored by AdLib, the self-serve DSP solution making advertising easy. What do the world's largest demand-side platforms have in common? They're effective, but they require large annual contracts and spend minimums. With AdLib, growing agencies get a single platform that connects to every top global DSP with no contracts, no spend minimums, and G2's #1 ranked support. That means access to the entire universe of TV, digital out-of-home, audio, display, video, and native without a hassle and with no blind spots. It's incredibly easy to use, plus it can automate most of the work your team spends hours a day doing manually. Get the most powerful media buying technology without the barriers to entry. Check out AdLib at getadlib.com today.
Welcome to Open Market, a podcast about building companies in the advertising industry. I'm Joe Zappa, and I'm joined by Eric Franchi, and apparently a kindred soul, as per Eric, a fellow bald man in advertising with hot takes, Jay Friedman, the CEO of Goodway Group. How's it going, Jay?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. Let's get into hot takes.
Jay, we always say building companies in the advertising industry because when we started this, we knew it would be mainly about ad tech, but we were like, let's open the door to our compatriots in like the agency world and the brand world and publishing. But you're the rare constituent of the agency world to come down from the mountain and bless us dirty ad tech people with your presence. So thank you for joining us.
Certainly never thought of it like that, but I'm gonna let you describe things as you see fit. And to be fair, I think I played within the ed tech world for a long time, and we've recently expanded beyond it, but still think that we do quite a bit that's ad techy.
Before we get started, could you just tell the listeners about Goodway Group?
Yeah, Goodway Group is a 95-year-old company. My partner is Dave Walk. He's the grandson of the founder, and then his son Mike Walk is now in the business. So fourth generation is present. And it was a printing company, which got into printing marketing materials, which got into some marketing with a printing company. And then when I joined in 2006, we expanded that to digital. And one of the first things that 2006 was kind of when Right Media began. And so one of the first things that we learned about and started to work with were the ad exchange model. And we just saw the ad exchange and programmatic, really that programmatic model, as such a more efficient way of doing things. Now, obviously, we've learned there's efficiencies that are real and then efficiencies that are perceived since then. But yeah, and over time, we've grown to, we have 5 brands. We have an agency that works with brands. We have a commerce agency that works with retailers and CPGs. We have a global consultancy. They're absolutely crushing it. People tell me they're like, yeah, I have to be in Rio next week and Shanghai the week after. And I'm like, oh man, that's a lot. Okay. And then we have a growth marketing company. And then we still work with and help 60 to 65 agencies around the country do their programmatic, search, social, et cetera.
Incredible. How has your role changed in the company since you started, which is almost 20 years now?
Yeah. Since this morning, it's certainly evolved. I came in as an unknown entity, really, talking about digital. And I think in 2006, there were some folks that were digital veterans to a degree. But even, that was, the burst ad network days and stuff like that. And so it was very, very opaque, and it was hard to measure. It was hard to validate. And quickly we sought to do that. And so as our business transitioned to digital, I became more of a COO role. I'm sure in the 5 minutes people have been listening, they can tell I'm probably not, the typical sales revenue guy, but took more of an operational role. And then over time, just started to realize how we could optimize sales, how we could go to market better, and took on the president role. And then, I don't know, a year and a half ago or something, maybe it was even longer than that, but took over the CEO role, and it's been great.
Congrats. So you have said a bunch of really interesting things over the course of the past weeks and months. We've been keeping track. So what we're going to do is ask you to expand on a few of these hot takes that you've presented the world via
Sure.
LinkedIn and all those places. So Joe, hit Jay with what you got.
It's like a dissertation defense. You have said things, and now you have to stand by them in the public.
Sounds like a plan.
You told us that moving marketing to the top of the boardroom agenda is your main goal as the CEO of Goodway Group. Could you talk more about that?
I was in advertising 20 years ago where media was barely ever discussed in a meeting with the client. It was so boring that they would leave it for the last 3 minutes. And it was like creative, business. And with digital, I saw media moved to the top of the advertising meeting agenda because it is such an important growth lever. And that doesn't mean that creative isn't. I think it's a yin yang end of story kind of thing. But marketing is the single largest growth lever for any business when done well. And I have full empathy for everybody who's trying to measure marketing, to the nth degree. But when done well, if it's the single biggest growth lever and the board of a company is going to get together and growth is an important goal, why is marketing not the first thing that they're talking about? Well, why? Because they don't believe in the measurement, because it's too loosey-goosey and, it's too theoretical or whatever. The reality is it's not, though. Like, I think we can measure today marketing's impact with as much confidence as we can any other innovation, building a factory, any other efficiency gains. It's just different how we measure it. So our goal is to work with CMOs and help them move marketing to the top of the meeting when the C-suite gets together or the board gets together, such that everybody goes, tell us about what's happening in marketing, because that's what's growing our business.
Do you have anything that's resonating in empowering your CMO partners?
One of the things that's so important is, it's fascinating that sometimes going back to the very, very fundamentals of digital, we go and a CFO will still say, like, you're telling me you're putting 78 million ads on phones and desktops. Like, how do I know that's even happening? And it's like, wow, thank you for asking that. So, like, here's how an impression gets counted. And here's why we know it's true. And here are the 18 tags we put on it to verify this and that and the other. So there's that component, number one. Number two is it really is about the triangulation of MMM and incrementality and some MTA where it's valid. But by being able to show incrementality, like, we did nothing different except for this thing in these 10 markets, 5 here, 5 here. All 5 of these went this way. Should we stop doing that? Right? And I think that's one of the most important questions is, should we stop doing what appears to be working, even if it's not 99% confidence level statistically? And most people will say no. And it's like, well, if we shouldn't stop it, why shouldn't we do more of it? And so, yeah, I think we've had a lot of success across a lot of clients in showing them true incrementality driven by marketing. And that's really the first thing. I think if any agency who begins working with a brand, there's tactical metrics, there's media metrics, there's advertising metrics, there's marketing metrics, there's business metrics, right? There's that ladder. And I think helping any CMO climb that ladder, both mentally and with data, and then partnering with their C-suite to say, put us in front of your CFO. We would love, because we can absolutely prove this stuff. That's fantastic. And so our goal is to really get the CFO and CMO to be highly partnered and both on the same page. I don't think it's antagonistic in most cases, but where there's that subtle lack of belief can be super challenging.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot recently about how, digital ushered in this outcomes era of marketing, right? And that is the ultimate, that is the fire to which everyone's feet are being held is can you show you're driving outcomes? And then the challenge for the agency becomes, how do you explain those outcomes? How do you frame them? And can you actually show that they're incremental? Within the ad tech world, we talk a lot about channels and the various places that brands have to put their money, right? So for example, Google and Meta have built these giant businesses largely saying that they're driving performance, they're driving outcomes. Obviously, a common critique in the ad tech world is that those outcomes that they claim to be driving, especially via tools like Performance Max or Advantage Plus, aren't necessarily incremental. How do you think about that as an agency where you don't have a stake in where the money's going, you just want to generate incremental impact? How do you think about the landscape today?
Let's just plot one thing you just said out of there. We don't have a stake in where the money's going. Most agencies do. Most agencies have made commitments, are signed up for principal trading, all of this stuff. I don't care where the money goes. I simply want to grow a client's business. Now, one of the things, and I think, one of the things we've talked about in the past is, what are some important lessons you've learned as a CEO? And one of the most important things I've learned is when to listen and when not to listen. And I don't listen to what major platforms tell me about their own performance. I just validate it myself. Now, they're really good at getting in the CMO's ear and telling them how amazing they are. But that's up to us to build a trusted relationship with the CMO that extends beyond that and helps them see and think differently. But outcomes should be what our feet are held to. The challenge that I think we all have to explain and help folks understand is it's not just I ran an ad and then we sold more stuff. We are literally dealing with measuring human behavior, and every human being is unique and different. And so I think one thing that's highly underrepresented in ad tech and measurement and in the agency world is the academic research that has gone into understanding what drives outcomes. And, the long and the short of it by Binet and Fields, share of voice equals share of market over time. For instance, a lot of people, they look at in an MMM model, they go, what's my base and what's my incremental? And I'm like, well, there's really maybe three. There's true base, right? Which is if I never did any advertising, this many people would just buy my product. Then there's base maintenance. It's your base today, but if you stopped advertising altogether, it would kind of crumble down. And then you've got your incremental overall. And so I think just explaining things like that and helping people see that there's a funnel and there's a reason there's a funnel and how we shepherd people through that funnel and what the barriers to purchase are. It is literally a brain science business that people, maybe because the large platforms have come out and said, give us $1, we'll give you $5 back. It sounds so good and easy, and it's not. It's exceptionally hard.
Yeah, I think it's that the performance that they're driving, it sounds easy, and for the CMO, it puts them in a position where, like, again, when you're thinking about that boardroom and elevating marketing status in the boardroom, it puts them in a position where it's the easiest thing to do. It's the easiest thing to go. Google and Meta are two of the largest companies in the world, let alone the advertising industry. And I put these dollars in and they said these dollars came back out. But then you are at risk as a CMO of ending up in the situation we saw Nike very publicly end up in earlier this year, where after a number of years of investing in that kind of performance marketing, you see sales, which are ultimately what matters, dropping. And then you say, okay, well, something's not lining up here. Like Google and Meta are telling me it's working, but it's clear based on the business metrics that it's not working. And that's when I think the sort of return to incrementality and like a marketing philosophy comes back, because you start saying, okay, we can't take this at face value. As you said, Jay, we need a partner in like an agency that can validate these things on a third-party basis and show us what's actually driving incremental sales.
Yeah, so with our growth marketing agency, we work with a ton of startups, both B2B and B2C. Our advice to them is in the very beginning, in an established category, let's say you're a new soap brand or something like that, like by all means, don't build your brand first. There are a ton of people searching for soap. Just steal what you can right out of the bottle. Okay. But there's a point at which you've stolen all you can, and you're only going to grow what you can steal by having a name that's more recognized and considered. And so it's a constant series of S curves that brands need to go through. Now, of course, if you're Nike, you've achieved the awareness S curve, right? But awareness doesn't mean preference. And people have to have an emotional reason to have preference. You look at On sneakers, or Hoka sneakers is a good example. I was somewhere and this one lady, I was like in a checkout line. This one lady says to this other person, like, oh, you have Hokas. I love them. Don't you love them? And I'm like, brands just formed a human connection. And these people otherwise would have had nothing to say to each other. But does Nike do that? Do you look at other people with Nikes and say, oh my God, you have a Nike, right? And so now how do you measure that? Well, there are a lot of ways to measure that.
We can go down a rabbit hole of this marketing stuff. We want to talk to you about a few other things.
Yeah.
Jay. So, all right. Another thing Jay has said, you have been a proponent of remote work, remote organizations for as long as I've known you. There's a humorous anecdote we don't need to get into. A previous episode of Marketecture, you should check out when Jay was on. We get into our first meeting. I showed up at his house by accident because I thought it was his office. Anyway, how has your opinion on remote work changed, if at all, over the course of the past, I guess, more importantly, 5 years, and with everything going on in the world?
It's changed a lot, to be honest with you. I think, we just recently hired a chief data and analytics officer. And if you told me I only could hire that person in one place, right, New York, Chicago, whatever it is, I'd feel pretty constrained. New York, plenty of talent, but, the salaries can be really high. St. Louis, probably the talent pool isn't as big, but the salaries might be lower, right? And so I think that the companies that have a number of hubs around the country where work can take place is a good model. And it doesn't need to be 5 days a week, but I think being able to touch base in person every so often is important. Because I think, we all tell ourselves stories, and in the absence of information, the stories we make up at work are 99% of the time negative. And so if you have to go into work even every couple of weeks and just sit with people for a day, it's amazing how those stories can normalize. So I think that the majority of remote work is highly beneficial. And I think it does create better work-life integration ability. I don't use work-life balance. I think it's not on and off at one time. But at the same time, I do think, there is a benefit to being able to see each other a little more often than once a year and being able to normalize sentiment and communication.
And so have you fostered that change at Goodway by creating hubs, or whatever the term you used?
So I'm starting by setting the example, right? So every couple of weeks in Dallas, we're going to go to a co-working space and sit together. And if you can make it, great. It's not mandatory, right? If you can make it, great. If you can't, okay. But, and I'm in Chicago right now. We've got a great group here, and they do that on their own. And so I'm encouraging that where people want to organically do it. And whether or not we do it more formally over time, we'll have to see. As Steve Jobs said, there are 1,000 good ideas. There are like 2 great ideas. And so this might be a good idea, but we have to see if it's really worth the effort.
Jay, to tie some of the marketing stuff together with the culture stuff, you said that your goal of moving marketing to the top of the boardroom agenda at your brand client organizations sometimes conflicts with Goodway being a great place for people to grow their career. So you've had to learn to navigate that tension and when to listen to people. Tell us more about that tension.
Yeah, so I think my intent was, when you get these surveys from the Best Place to Work Awards, they focus on a lot of satisfying the individual within the environment. And that's not a bad thing by any stretch. But we have to remember that nobody was born working for Goodway, and no one's going to die working for Goodway, right? Or any other company. So that means at some point you've joined us, and at some point you're going to leave us. So we have to figure out how to optimize that time together and make it the right amount of time at the right intensity, right? So that this can be the best place to grow your career for the time that you're with us. And by doing that, I think that we do the very, very best for people. And the Best Place to Work Awards sometimes can lead leadership to want to maximize tenure and staying. And there's a very fine line between tenure being a good thing and tenure being overused as a good thing. One of my favorite things is in working with people is there's skilled and then there's overskilled. And being overskilled becomes a weakness. And like in debating things, I can be overskilled, right? I can actually make people feel less good about the conversation by debating. So that's not helpful. Being too good at something isn't helpful. And so being too good at trying to make sure people stay is not helpful either. We want this to be the most optimized, best part of their career. That may be for a couple of years. That might be for 10 or 15 years. It depends on the person and where we are in market. And we want to work with every employee to help them optimize this part of their career. And then we've had people go on and do amazing things. I love that. So it can conflict a little bit if you're not thinking about it right.
How do you talk to employees about that? Because it's somewhat controversial. Like it's, not what they hear from other employers.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it was Radical Candor or it was someone else, but there's a difference between nice and kind. And it's not the nicest thing to say, but it is absolutely the kindest thing to say. And I think, I can point to dozens of examples of people who have left Goodway for a role. And by the way, there are quite a few people who have come to me, maybe who didn't even report to me, and who have said, hey, I've got an offer somewhere else. What do you genuinely think? And I'm like, thank you so much, right? Like, let's look at it. Let's look at what it delivers for you that you're excited about. Let's look at whether it helps you achieve something greater. Because if it increases your trajectory over here, I'm going to tell you to probably take it. And by the way, the offer is 10% too low. For market for that is higher. Go back and negotiate. And if the legal contract says anything baloney, let me know. I'll walk you through it. Right? Like, I am more than happy to facilitate. I want to facilitate people being excellent. Inevitably, that has to come back to Goodway being excellent. And no, I'm not a lawyer.
That is awesome. Just in terms of a philosophy.
There's a similarity between that and like the marketing philosophy we were talking about earlier, I think, too, and that it's like coming from a place of generosity and sort of giving things away. I think it's how you build relationships with customers, and it's also how you build relationships with talent, and not just trying to grip people tighter, but sort of giving them all the information they could possibly have, right? Letting them benefit from your expertise. And then when it's right, they'll come back into the fold, or they'll stay in the fold if they're already there.
Yeah. So one thing we do that's in the minority for sure is we share our financials are fully open to our employees, down to net profit. I mean, it's not literally every line item. They don't need to see if we bought more Macs versus more PCs or whatever, right? But it's fully transparent. And so our employees know where we're making money, where we're not growing as fast as we wanted to, where we're growing faster than we wanted to. That helps them make the decisions of, well, then I want to get these skills because I want to be in that area, or what I like doing seems to not be being bought by the market as much, and maybe I need to go somewhere else. Again, a lot of controversial things that I think we do. A lot of people think, oh, it's just so much better to keep the financial secret. They don't need to know. And I'm like, yeah, but if you want to hire grown-ups and you want to hire really smart people, how can you treat them as though not knowing is better?
Yeah, I do think it's also a question of the caliber of person you're trying to attract, right? And as it becomes a bigger organization, yeah, you just have to let people in on that, and you have to let them share in the success if they're driving it, and you have to be honest with them if, frankly, you feel like they're asking for more than they did take a part in driving.
Yeah, I mean, a CEO friend of mine said, I'm worried about like the Glassdoor review that says, I was laid off because they found an AI way to do my job, right? And I said, why are you worried about that? Because the person who loves working with AI and is looking to make things more efficient will probably go, sweet, do you have any openings? Because I'd love to come do that more, right? And so I think there are a lot of things that we just presume are bad or presume are good. And as a CEO, it's really hard because you have hundreds of people telling you you're wrong, like all day, every day. And I have to sit there and I have to go, no, whether it's AI, whether it's marketing at the top of the boardroom agenda, whether it's remote, whatever it is, like this is what's better for us. And I appreciate your input, and we're going to move on.
Jay, one of the things that we nerd out on this pod is like marketing. Not marketing the way we talked about it in the beginning of this conversation, but like, like building brand and reputation as a company, as a leader, as a CEO.
Yeah.
And like you're such a student of this stuff. What's the difference between like, kind of like marketing as an ad tech company or platform and marketing as a CEO of an agency, or marketing as an agency?
I think anytime there's technology specifically behind the company, there's a little bit of separation between what you're buying and what you're seeing. It's like, look, there have certainly been ad tech companies through the years whose CEOs didn't have the most magnificent personalities, but they had pretty good product. And I think a lot of people could see past the personality and just say, but I like the product, so I'm going to go for it. I think in an agency, that's a lot harder because your people are your product, more or less. I mean, we've certainly built technology. We've certainly built processes and systems, but without phenomenal people to operate them and to move the thinking forward, it's not going to happen. So I do think there is a difference there. And I think that's important to note. Yeah, I've chosen my position very carefully. And, I do put out hot takes sometimes. And I realize that there are brands out there that will see that and say, yeah, we're not going to work with Goodway. But they're going to say that because in the end, they don't want to move marketing to the top of the boardroom agenda. They want to not change what they're doing and get it a little cheaper. And we're not built for that, right? We're not built to just cut the media cost 3% and do nothing better. We're built to cut the cost per outcome by a ton. So that's going to lead certain people to want to work with us.
I know Joe loves this stuff. Go ahead, Joe. I'll let you react.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about there is a form of marketing service or marketing product alignment, right? Like you have a bold approach to what you do and you want to move marketing to the center of the organizations with which you're working. So therefore, you have a bold approach to your own go-to-market and your presence. I would say I have a pretty similar way of looking at it, where it's like, I want to have provocative takes on the market and the way I do what I do, because I want to work with the CEOs who want the same thing and who have the same thing.
That's it.
And you often encounter CEOs who have the opposite impulse, actually, where you're trying to push them toward something that's productively controversial, that's substantively provocative. And they're like, what if we watered it down? And it's like, yeah, that's fine. You can absolutely find marketing partners who will do that and who excel at just like kind of keeping the ship afloat. But if your service isn't like that, you can't have a marketing approach that's like that.
Yeah, there's not a right or wrong way. I mean, I think both can achieve financial success, but I want to do more than just win business and help them keep doing what they've always done. I want to help our people have some impact on how marketing improves and changes. So that's why we exist, right? And we're not other people.
What has worked for you beyond like provocative takes on LinkedIn from a tactics perspective that come to mind?
Candidly, I think marketing for service firms and really even for SaaS to a degree today has become much more about content and cold calling up, having 100 people, cold calling up or showing up with cupcakes at an ad agency to get them to buy your newest platform. I don't know. When I talk to other folks in the industry, I see the sales efforts still strong, but I think back in 2010, God, if you don't have 100 salespeople, what are you doing? And so I think that has normalized. And I think content, when you write really thoughtful content, like the paper we put out with Dr. Fu about ad fraud and how we optimized our ad inventory and our supply so significantly. And when we take on new clients and we apply that tag, they're horrified at what they've been buying. But okay, right? Fu is more controversial than me. Let's be honest.
Yeah. We actually we talked about you, Joe and I just do podcasts all the time. We talked about you on Marketecture, where there was, and this is a total sidebar. This is yesterday. The episode dropped today. But there's these white noise apps that apparently just like churn through programmatic display ads, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I told Zappa, I was like Jay Friedman will at some point pipe up and say, yep, a Goodway client was never across these apps.
Again, the safest thing is to go with the largest vendor, right? But when you dig into what's behind what they're doing, there's not really anything. Like you can find in 2 hours, you can find 50 violations. And that's another thing I think, with ad tech, very few people really look behind what's happening and like into the log level data, not so much the code, but the log level data of like, where did this run? When did it run? Most people don't know that you need impressions, clicks, and conversions as separate files, right? In order to actually know what's happening. A lot of people think that impression generated a conversion. No, there is no single impression that generated a conversion, right? And so to know the depths of it, and again, like I want to be better than everybody else. So it takes having a mentality to not stop until you're satisfied.
I want to sort of summarize some of the stuff we've been talking about because we have a lot of disparate threads. So I want to make sure people are walking away with some sort of synthesis here. So, I mean, I think one thing is you need marketing product or marketing services alignment. If your product or service is about bold change, your marketing should be bold. And that holds for ad tech companies and agencies. I would say, too, that's becoming more true for software companies, as you said. You mentioned SaaS, as well as service businesses such as agencies, because people have so much information available to them before the sale. So think about the way you want to be sold to, right? Like, would you rather, if you have a need, especially a sophisticated need or a need for a sophisticated service, do you want to hire one of the 3 people you've been seeing talk really intelligently about this on LinkedIn and Twitter or wherever else for months? Or do you want to get a cold DM from an SDR? Like, it's definitely the former. The third thing I'll just say is that, you need to have a philosophy around what you do. Like, you need to clarify to people, like when you said share of voice ultimately equals share of market, like that's a point of departure as a principle for helping people understand how you think about marketing. And then when they say, okay, but show me the outcomes, you say, okay, well, this is important because if you don't have this understanding of how brand drives lower funnel outcomes, you're going to fall for the lower funnel tactics that are just helping you get the customers you would have gotten anyway. So it starts with that brand building, and then it's about understanding what's actually driving incremental outcomes lower down in the funnel. Maybe those are a few things that people can walk away with.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think on the share of voice over share of market is the largest study ever undertaken in advertising. And it's like 1,200 campaigns or brands. But that's like one part of the journey, right? And then there is the performance marketing component. And I will tell you, probably one of the top 2 things, I don't know what the other would be off the top of my head, but top 1 or 2 things that I hear from CMOs today is I need to show how we tie branded performance together. And I posted on LinkedIn the other day. It's staggering how many brands and CMOs really don't have that down pat. It's really not all that hard. It requires hard work.
I once did a seminar with a bunch of CMOs or VPs of marketing or whatever who wanted to become CMOs. And this was obviously in the software industry. And they basically regarded brand, like the consensus, which is very disturbing to me, of course, is that like brand is anything you can't measure. And so it's the stuff that's basically a Hail Mary. It doesn't count. It's like, you just throw 10 to 20% of your dollars there because like you should, I guess, but like whatever. And then everything that's measurable is performance. And that's what matters. That comes from a place of fear, right? That comes from a place of the marketer not having their own philosophy about how to tie these things together and what is effective. And then just saying, well, I'm just going to hide behind whatever metrics my dashboard gives me because that's what I can sort of hand to my boss and say, this is working.
And it's really hard. It's hard to measure how your sports sponsorship actually impacted things, right? But that doesn't mean it can't be done.
Right, exactly. And I have no idea if this was the Nike case, so I'm not going to talk about them in particular, but their type of product is a great example, right? It's like that sort of attitude of only what is easily measurable matters is how you end up with a marketing program that gives all the credit to the search ad. Like the Viant guys, Chris and Tim Van Arkoy said, that's how you end up giving all the credit to the branded search ad when they search Nike sneakers and then they click it and go buy the Nikes, when really it was all of the brand building, the sports sponsorships and the TV ads and whatever that drove the affinity for the brand.
Incrementality for the win.
Jay, one more question before we let you go. So many listeners of this pod are ad tech CEOs and ad tech heads of marketing and people that are generally trying to stand out and reach maybe not people like you, like agency CEOs, but the people that work for you.
Right.
Any advice or thoughts around, the way they should go about their marketing? Thinking about the ultimate goal is, kind of being recognizable to an agency like Goodway.
There's 2 things. Number 1, coming from a little bit more of an ad tech background and expanding into more of a true media and ultimately advertising background or environment. Wherever we are, we think that's what other people's worlds are like also. But all of media is 10% of a CMO's time Digital is less. Programmatic is like maybe one or two are not on the radar. Ad tech is generally not on the radar, right? And so even in media, we think like, well, that's clearly what the CMO is focused on, but they have loyalty and in-store marketing and 500 other things. And so I think that when we get DMs from people or whatever, it's like they come in like, okay, my world is really, really important. And I'm like, your world is like a 14th of my world, which is like a 10th of my client's world. So it's not. So that's number one. Number two is most products just aren't that different. And I think if you work for someone who's just not that different, I don't have a whole lot of advice, right? Like, what are there, 70 SSPs? And, I could put my ad through 68 of them and it would all come out the same on the others, right? And it doesn't matter. And so don't call me or message me and tell me like, but we do this and this and this. I mean, you're talking about like 0.3% improvement, which is not worth my time to take the call, to make any changes, all this other stuff. So number one, you have to have a real point of difference with real case studies. And I would encourage anybody who works for a company that's a same as or a me too or whatever, either probably move to a different company or just accept the fact that it's going to be very relationship driven and a little bit of luck, right? So that's that component. But I think when they do reach out to people like Goodway, and I will say one of the huge benefits of remote is that our buyers are all over the place and there are no jeans parties. There are no, seriously, there's no Taylor Swift concerts, right? Like it's pretty hard to bribe somebody in Des Moines, or Sioux Falls. And we just don't do that. But at the same time, we have people dedicated to sussing out everyone who may have ever appeared on the Lumascape because we have to know about them. Right. And so I think if an ad tech CEO or whatever is trying to reach out and at more agencies, I think ad tech CEOs know in their head, do I really have a point of difference here that I'd be shocked if they didn't see, versus I need them to see this as a point of difference because it will help me grow, right? And if you're fooling yourself, right? Like you just don't always admit it.
Well, and to your point earlier, Jay, if you don't have genuine product differentiation, which just to be quite frank, many ad tech companies don't have, or it's at least not visible to the party on the other end, marketing becomes even more important because to survive, you do need to differentiate. And if you can't win on genuine product differentiation, then at the very least, you, again, share a voice, share a market. You should be trying to win on trust, win by being helpful, win by being authoritative. Like those are all means to overcome that commoditization problem.
I say it in a different way than Bezos said it, but paid media or paid marketing is essentially a tax on an imperfect product market fit. Right? If you build something that's so perfect and you just get one person to try it, they will shout on the rooftops and everybody will be using it and you won't have to do any marketing or media. Right? But there are very few companies that ever have created anything like that.
Yeah. It's like, assume you don't have that.
Correct. And so, but now you have to find the niches where you are a fit and create that point of differentiation and establish it within your brand.
Jay, this is so good. Thank you, as always, for your time. Where if people want to reach out, where can they find you on the internet?
LinkedIn is, you always are on every social network. No, but
not anymore.
I'm old now. I like LinkedIn, right? I can only have one bookmark on my browser, right? I can't, and it has to be this big.
All right, Jay Friedman on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, anytime.
Joe Zappa, want to take us home?
Yeah, like, subscribe, find us on LinkedIn and Twitter. As I always say, yell at us in the public square. We're happy to chat. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.